Welcome, fellow gamers. I am Tactical Gamer, and this is our New World Weapon Combination Review, where we take your favorite builds and test them to max level 20. We do a deep dive into their stats, skill tree choices, gear selection, and perks. Then we compare the pros and the cons and give you helpful tips that we learned during the journey. Then we lay out the good, the bad, and the truly horrific. In the end, you decide if this build is right for you. Be sure to check the description for a handy video guide if you want to skip to between sections, and let's get started. Today we introduce the bow rapier build. It's a playstyle that doesn't appeal to everyone, but it does have its fan favorites, and if being a damage dealing player fits your style of play, then this combination will not leave you dissatisfied. A combination of damage over time, area effect, and single target burn capabilities. It's a very well-rounded synergized combination. Though this guide is geared for PVM play, we do offer tips and suggestions that even the foolhardy PvP players may find useful if you rely on either of these weapons. So let's jump right in and look at the stats for this build. Looking at the stats for this build, the bow and rapiers share huge synergy for solo, group, and PvP play. They both rely on dexterity for the main damage source, and though the rapier can also benefit from a boost in intelligence, it is by no means necessary. And make no mistake, you will be maxing out your dexterity. For this build, we only need to hit the 100 Constitution breakpoint for additional health boost, which leaves us with enough points to maximize Dex at 300, and depending on your gear, any leftover points can go into Constitution or Intelligence to push the rapier damages even further. As you level and are trying to acquire the right gear, don't be afraid or shy away from Dexterity, Intelligence, or Intelligence Constitution items that have our key perks as described later in this guide. Even though the rapier gains 0.92 damage for each point of dexterity, it also gains 0.85 from each point of intelligence. Just note that 100 con and 300 dex are your targets, with gear and points, with any remaining being sunk into intelligence or additional health. The 100 constitution may seem like an issue, but if you follow our gear guide and stick to dex con gear, when able, it will not become an issue. Magdon at level 44 had over 6k hit points, and in group play, the tank should be holding the aggro to give you pretty much constant automatic critical hits from the back. The skills for this build. Now this build relies heavily on area effect and front arc area effect damage over time, with single target burst damage as finishers. The dots make irrelevant any mob or player's use of healing over time spells, buffs, or regenerative potions. In fact, the dots have the psychological effect of applying pressure to a player using hit and run tactics while sidelining their healing abilities. So let's take a look at the bow first. When soloing on group play, your bow is going to be your starting rotation for maximizing damage over time. Even though we put a huge emphasis on stacking and maxing damage over time, or dots, you will see that our single target burst damage is also huge. We start our bow career with Rain of Arrows. This area effect attack, when upgraded with the passives in our guide, will hit each target for 150 weapon damage and apply our first damage over time in the form of a bleed for 85% weapon damage every second for 12 seconds. And it can be stacked up to 3 times. Now this stacking is rarely possible in solo play, but it is the norm in group situations, while also slowing the mobs to give us time to land our Poison Shot, which is our next area effect damage over time attack, that when upgraded will also be doing 200% single target plus 12% weapon damage every second for 20 seconds. These two attacks happen very quickly, almost before the mob can start its move. Now that the group of mobs have 2 dots, and we follow up with our third active ability, Rapid Shot, to burn down our first single target before switching to our rapier. Note, we sacrifice some of the slow and haste passives for more damage output. Slow in this game are barely noticeable, and with the exception of bosses, fights will be quick. Though haste and more maneuverability is important for PvP, it is outside the focus of this guide. Maximizing damage when using the rapier, we stick to the blood tree exclusively with just one minor change. Both solo and in group play, the use of heavy attacks is a much rarer than just straight up light attacks, so it makes sense to shy away from spending points on heavy attack passives and favor more to light attack bonuses. Like the bow, we are going to lean heavily into the damage over time with burst single target damage. It should be noted that with these rapier skills, Tondo, Flurry, and to a lesser extent Flourish and Finish, will apply to all the mobs in the front arc of your attack, acting more like an area effect than a single target ability. For this reason, it pairs well with the bow selections previously mentioned. We start our rotation to apply our first Rapier Bleed with the active ability Tondo. The passives and later perk selections in our guide will also boost your damage output against mobs who have bleed effects on them. Because of the refresh timer, we place Flurry as our next action skill. Flurry is designed to extend the time of our bleeds, and when upgraded, will further reduce the reuse timer and will stagger the mob, setting them up for our Flourish and Finish skill. Note that the game makes a distinction between the bleed from Tondo and the bleed from Rain of Arrows passive skill Barbed Arrows. Flourish and Finish expends the bleeds on a mob for 110% of weapon damage each as a form of burst damage, but this only applies to the bleeds applied from Tondo. Note that you can stack up to 3 Tondo bleeds for a burst finish of 330% of weapon damage. Obviously more important for longer single target fights, such as group dungeons or soloing elites. So we're going to take a look at the various playstyles, but regardless of the playstyles, some rules are universal with this build. Rapid Shot has a delay if you're standing still. After Rain of Arrows and Poison Shot, just before hitting the hotkey for this action, be sure to move slightly to avoid this delay. Headshots and attacks from the back are all automatic critical damage. All bow shots should be attempted to the head. Practice makes perfect. When possible, attacks should be at the rear of a mob. Even in solo play, some mobs' attacks have a graphic delay which leaves them exposed to you moving for a rear attack. Light attacks, or Tondo, and Flurry Rapier actions can be done with your block engaged. And this is important. The game will perform the action and graphic with the right mouse button engaged throughout, re-entering block the quickest. Regardless of which weapon is currently active, you can also hit the number that corresponds to that weapon currently equipped to briefly see where your active skill timers on your alternate weapon are at. And sometimes that's important so that you don't have to switch back and forth. Now, for solo, while soloing, we just start our pulls with the bow rotation at a distance, applying Rain of Arrows and Poison Shot dots, and then landing our Rapid Shot to completion, then swapping to a Rapier build to apply Tondo, engage Flurry, and then Flourish and Finish to do our burst damage. The only variation on this is versus elite mobs, where solo fights will go longer. In this case, stacking the full 3 bleeds of Tondo before using Flurry and Finish is key to maximizing that burst damage. Now for grouped, say for dungeons or corruptions, it's the same process as solo, though you will end up rotating between the bow and rapier multiple times as your bow skills timers are refreshed. Over longer fights, you will find yourself moving in and out of melee range depending on when your bow actions are refreshed, especially versus boss-like mobs and groups of mobs that last longer. Tanks tend to congregate the mobs in clusters, making them easy prey for your area effect bow attacks, and again, as you move into melee range, with that front area effect arc for your rapier skills. In group situations, just remember the rules. Tondo and Flurry hitting all mobs in your front arc, so position is key. Remember where your automatic critical damage comes from, headshots in the back. Move slightly before Rapid Shot to avoid that buggy delay. You are at your most vulnerable when moving into groups with your rapier, so keep that block up. You can have block active for Tondo and Flurry, reducing incoming damage, but be sure to remove the block when you do a Flurry and Finish, or it'll interrupt that. Now, though this is not an ideal build for PvP, or at least for the randomness of PvP, we choose to dabble in PvP while if you choose to dabble in PvP while following this build, you will have the dots on your side for applying some pressure while you try to engage. Without the evasion action skill, though, you're going to be at a disadvantage from a mobility standpoint, especially if you follow our gear guide and delve into medium armor weights. Remember that the musket hits harder and has a longer range than your bow, but it has a higher reload timer. You will have to rely on quick application with precision of Tondo, Flurry, Flourish, and Finish to complete the job. Your ability to disengage to reuse the bow will be difficult. We'll be creating a separate guide dedicated just to PvP for this same build in the future, so be looking for it. On the subject of perks, since this guide is not big on PvP, and naturally we are going to recommend avoiding the faction armor pieces. Though they are a great way to ensure each piece has the recommended Dex Constitution stat mix, the perks are geared towards PvP play exclusively. We are aware of a bug with the Resilient perk as it relates to reducing all damage rather than critical damage, critical damage only, as its description implies. We also are aware that this will be patched at a future date, and though stacking this perk can greatly improve your durability, there are other options more suited to the DPS Trinsic build, especially since this is more PVM. For perks to really be effective, they need to be stacked in numbers. So picking a few choices and sticking with it will garner better results than a patchwork of individual benefits. Choose to focus either on crit chance and crit damage for maximizing your DPS, or choose the life-stealing route if you just want some more durability, especially if you find yourself doing more solo play than group play. So for crit stacking is achieved by focusing on the perks Keen Awareness, and Keen Tondo to increase your overall critical chance, with Vicious and Rogue to improve your crit damage. Keenly Jagged can be helpful as it adds yet another dot option on critical hits, where Keenly Empowered will give you an additional 15% boost to overall damage for about 5 seconds. Both of these do not require stacking, and a single piece with them can be helpful. Leech Stacking. Now, Leech Stacking has two pathways. Both achieve better survivability for a build that can sometimes feel like a glass cannon if you get mass aggro quickly. One route is achieved by focusing on leeching, lifestealing, and mortal lifestealing perks to convert a percentage of damage as health or a health boost on kills. Though most of these perks exist only on jewelry or weapons only, they can be coupled with the second route for a more rounded approach. The second route involves stacking Leeching Flurry with Refreshing Ward, Refreshing Move, and the Refreshing Perk. The Refreshing Perks collectively will reduce your action skills timers, and Leeching Flurry will add a decent amount of percentage of damage to health for each of the 5 hits that the Flurry skill actually does. Refreshing and Leech Flurry perks can be found on almost all armor pieces, and as such can generate a nice burst healing each time you use it, while also gaining the added benefit of reduced timers on skills, which just equates to more DPS. Now, some random perks with benefits for this build, especially if you're having an issue finding your preferred perks on items with good stats. Bloodletting will extend the bleed you apply by a percentage for both Tondo and Rain of Arrows. Poisoning will extend the duration of your poison shot dot. Out of all of your dots, this is the weakest, so its benefit even stacked is minimal. Enfibling poison shot adds a weaken effect that reduces a mob's damage for about 4 seconds. This is pretty much useless in solo play, but helpful when grouped. No stacking necessary. Having it on a single piece is helpful. Penetrating Rapid Shot to basically just increase the chance of hitting with that last shot to get up to the 150% weapon damage and trigger the knockback effect. That one's almost worthless, but I didn't want to not mention it. Mortal Power grants you the Empower buff for 5 seconds, which improves damage by 15%. It can be stacked with Keenly Empowered, thereby triggering on critical hits and mob's death, but you might want to keep in mind that it can only trigger once every 10 seconds. There is a perk called Plentiful Arrows. You can get it on your bags, and it's rather useful for, arrow management, I guess, for lack of a better term. Before we dive into gear, we should take a moment to briefly touch on gem selections. Your best in-slot choice for bows will be diamonds for increased damage while you're at full health, something that should be true solo or grouped. Best in slot for the Rapier will be Malachite for increased damage on mobs with crowd control effects. Remember, even solo, your rain of arrows is applying a slow. For your armor pieces, Diamond, Onyx, and Malachite are your friend for just adding pure physical and elemental absorption. If you take our advice in gearing for medium armor, then these gems will push you closer towards heavier armor-like protection without sacrificing mobility. Taking a look at gear for this build, medium armor classification is your friend. 10% bonuses to damage, healing, and crowd control durations, while adding a heavy chest piece for greater resistance. With New World's equipment load system, you will have a gear classification set by the weight of your combined articles of armor. This lets you mix and match light to heavy armor pieces to keep you under the 23-pound weight limit. And we recommend you think of it this way rather than only seeking medium armor pieces and limiting yourself. The best possible combination for equipment load is a heavy chest, a light helm, medium legs, boots, and gloves. So 13 to 23 armor weight score is your goal while trying to stay as close to 23 without going over. By looking at equipment in this way, you can mix and match pieces, making it easier to seek out your next gear goal, and that is to strive for dex and constitution on all pieces till you reach your 100 con breakpoint. Then you can begin to favor pure dex pieces till you hit the 300 dex breakpoint. After that, stacking in some additional constitution or intelligence to improve your rapier damage beyond the normal range. By mixing armor pieces, you will also broaden your ability to find the few key perks you've decided to dedicate your build towards. Well, there you have it. There's the overview of the PVM version of the bow rapier weapon combination. What do you think? How does it compare to your DPS build? Does it fit your playstyle? Have a favorite build you'd like to see us review? Leave some feedback in the comments and be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the new Bow Rapier PvP version. And we'll see you next time.